Good day. Welcome to our Analysis Weekly Wraps. I'm Viv Govender, and as usual, what we'll do is we'll start up with a general market segment and end up with a tech segment. This week, the tech segment is going to be a bit more in depth than normal. I've been saying that for the last couple of weeks, but I think with what happened with DeepSeek, it's necessary to go into more depth around the situation in the AI space at the moment. In the general market segment, we're going to look at the latest rate decisions from the US and South Africa, as well as what they mean going forward, as well as Trump's latest or second week basically in power. Then in the tech segment, like I said, we'll just have a brief discussion about some of the earnings that came out from Microsoft, Meta, and Tesla, before focusing in depth on DeepSeek and also Chola's latest or new AI program from Alibaba as well, and what's really happening in this tech space, because of course we've seen gigantic movements in things like Nvidia over the last week or so. So let's start off with the rates announcements. The US did not cut rates as expected. The market basically was initially nervous because of some of the statements of the statement that was released, more fearful about rate cuts for the rest of the year. But in the subsequent conference, they basically were reassured, and we saw a bit of a fall and before a recovery coming through in the market. Now, regarding US interest rates, the Fed has said that they basically are reasonably okay with what's been happening with regards to the growth in the economy, but they're nervous about inflation numbers, especially considering some of the uncertainty around tariffs that have been introduced by or announced or actually threatened in some cases by Donald Trump. I think with regards to that, it's obviously a situation in which the Fed has to basically take its cue from what happened in the market. But I want to point out a different kind of aspect to this. There is a developing, or already has been developed, a bit of antagonism between Donald Trump and Jerome Powell. Why? Because Trump has come out and kind of accused Powell of trying to support the Biden administration by cutting interest rates during the Biden administration when they should not have been cut, and trying to keep them high at the start of the Trump administration in order to kind of hamstring the Trump economy. Obviously, to a person like Powell, that's a great insult. And he's basically, in recent times, been asked about whether or not he would resign if Trump asked him to come out in a very strong no. And I think, obviously, Powell is a professional, etc. But I think that when you do have this kind of antagonism, there's always, the threat that down in some way it kind of influences the Fed's decisions. I think the Fed, is acting in the correct way at the moment, given the inflation situation in the US. But I do think that going forward, Powell is probably looking at his legacy. He's not likely to be returned to office next term, so he's going to be replaced next year, 2026. And so at that point in time, all he will have from his time at the Fed would be basically his legacy. And that's obviously important for someone that has had a career in the sector as he has. And if you look historically, the most well-regarded person in terms of central bankers, at least in the US and probably even globally, has been Paul Volcker. And what Volcker did was he basically was willing to keep interest rates higher for longer to fight inflation. And that kind of built his reputation, and even 4 decades later, more than 4 decades later, he's still considered to be, like I said, the preeminent US, definitely central bank governor, probably even one of the best in the world, if not the best ever. And I think Jerome Powell, in that scenario where he's antagonistic towards the Trump administration, there's uncertainty about inflation, and historically, the guy that keeps interest rates higher for longer is considered to be, the better central bank governor than the one like, for instance, Alan Greenspan, who trying to, open the taps and, let things flow as they may. I think if we had to err on the side of what interest rates are going to do in the US going forward, I would probably err on the side of less rather than more cuts going forward. In South Africa, we cut by a quarter. As expected, I think there is no doubt that, we are probably a little more cautious than the Fed has been with regards to cutting interest rates. If you look at our real interest rate, our inflation rate right now is about 3%. Interest rates like about 4% higher than that. That is a significant gap. That's higher than it's normally been historically in South Africa. And the reason for this is that I think if you had to look at comparative countries in the world, things like Brazil, Nigeria, Turkey, and look at what their currencies have done over the last little while, you see there's a lot more fluctuation, a lot more variation in the value of their currencies than it has been in the rand. And I think that one of the reasons for this is because the Reserve Bank has prioritized stability in the currency above trying to fine-tune the interest rate to try and get the maximum growth rate while keeping inflation under control. I think they have seen that if they had to err on any side, it was high interest rates, it was basically protecting the currency rather than like trying to boost growth in the short term. And I think that's worked out. If you look at the issues that places like Turkey have had, Nigeria has had, etc., with regards to fluctuating inflation because of weakening interest rate, which was exchange rates, I do think that the Reserve Bank, even though in any particular decision you can say, okay, maybe right now we're a little bit higher than we should be, I think that in terms of its overall effect on the economy, it's probably been an overall positive. The issue of the South African economy is not being the fact that our interest rates are too high. There are other factors like load shedding and lack of suitable education, etc. That's been holding us back. In terms of what the Reserve Bank has been responsible for, which is basically inflation, money supply, keeping the currency or protecting the value of the currency, I think they've done a pretty good job, and certainly better than many of the competitors they have out there in the world. So moving on to Trump, the second week of Trump, and normally wouldn't be giving these weekly updates, but yeah, unfortunately you have to with the Trump administration at the moment. Now, we've had a couple of moves, especially around the tariff scenario. So in the last, in the last week or so, Trump was sending a couple airplanes across with deportees, people that were basically found to be in the U.S. illegally, back to their home countries, one of which was Colombia. The Colombians refused it. Why? Because they were military planes. This is just another, kind of superficial thing that is important. Trump is using military planes because he wants to show that he's tough on immigration, whereas it would cost half as much money, literally half as much, to use commercial airlines, and would probably be much less negative feedback from that, because the US, for those that don't know, has a really torrid history of interfering, and let us say that in nice terms, in South America. And many countries, Colombia among them, has experienced the downsides of US interference in their military and political scene. And so therefore there's a certain tinge to having a US military plane coming to the US, coming to Colombia. And so the Colombian government protested. Trump went out and he basically announced massive tariffs, 25%, going up to 50% in a very short order. The Colombian leader basically seemed to acquiesce. They in fact sent their own plane to pick up the people, but in many ways that was kind of like solving the problem, because they weren't having a problem with taking back deported persons. They were having a problem that they were being delivered by military aircraft. And then he had a rather extraordinary, let me say that, post on X/Twitter, in which he talked about how Colombia is basically proud and beautiful and will feed the world with this corn, and now it's open for the world, and they feel betrayed by the US, though he loves the black ghettos of Washington D.C. This is strictly from the Post. I think that it's worth seeing what happened here and extrapolating it to the rest of the world as well. Trump has shown that he's willing to basically go out and really be aggressive, using the kind of power he has to affect his decisions globally. And the reason I bring that up is not just because of the interesting fact of what happened to Colombia, it's but what South Africa might be facing going forward. South Africa has, in the past couple of years, really bumped up against the US, especially around the issue of Israel. Trump is, if anything, more pro-Israel than Biden was. One of the things that Trump has done in the last week or so has been to cancel, or at least postpone for a review process, federal funding of many things, including things like the HIV program in South Africa. Now, and lots of foreign aid. Now, the important thing to note about this is that the South African government is not going to have the same kind of, I think, goodwill with Trump that the UK government, for instance, might have or expect to have, or the Indian government, I think, also would be up there. I think Japan is also probably in his good graces. South Africa is not. And what's been shown with Colombia is he's willing to go from 0 to 100 in terms of speed in no time, in terms of like going after tariffs, going after, economic harm. If he perceives that he's been, kind of insulted, or he perceives that there's kind of pushback by smaller countries against the US. And I can only wonder what the danger profile for South Africa looks like going forward because of things, like I said, like our case in international criminal courts around Israel, because of some of the stuff we've done with BRICS, which might be perceived to be anti-US, but because of our relationship with Russia, for instance. And so that might be a thing to watch out going forward. Okay, let's move on to our AI/tech segment. So some stocks came out with results this week. We had Microsoft, we had Meta, we had Tesla, as I speak to you. Tesla results disappointing. They didn't deliver as many as vehicles as been hoped for. But Elon Musk has a great story, and the story was out there again, in which he basically said, Tesla is on a pivotal path. The 2025 is a pivotal year for Tesla. They're on a path to becoming the most valuable company in the world, more valuable than the next couple of companies combined. Talking about deliveries of autonomous robots by next year. Very, very positive, very, very optimistic kind of view, considering the fact that his mainstay in the company, which is the electric vehicles, have, like I said, disappointed in terms of deliveries. But the market liked it. After hours, the share price did go up after initially falling. Now, I do think that Musk historically has been overly optimistic about deliveries. But eventually he does usually get there. And I think that with regards to robotics, that might also be the case, but just have a caveat there because I'll talk about it in a second. Meta's results, bottom and top line beats, stock price, did a bit of a positive move after market. Microsoft, a bit of disappointment forecast coming through, and the share price pulled back after market. I'll speak to you here to get Amazon and Apple, but I'll speak to you about that next week. Overall, a very volatile week in the market, especially for tech stocks, especially for the AI-linked stocks, like, for instance, Microsoft and NVIDIA. And that has been triggered by one big announcement, which was basically the release of what's called DeepSeek, which is a program or an AI system from China. Apparently, the system was trained for about $6 million. That's what the M. Now, understand that Musk and, OpenAI and, Anthropic, etc., are talking about billions of dollars with the B, 1,000 times more in some cases than what DeepSeek used to create their model. And the reason that this is important is because the DeepSeek model seems to be up to a similar level as much of what's available out there right now. In some ways, better than anything else in certain aspects. Now, there are definitely areas in which it's behind. It's not linked to the internet. So I think the last string date they have there is October 2023, which obviously is over a year ago in terms of the training data that are available. So when you ask it, like, what's the best movie of last year, it's going to talk about 2022. Also, the second thing is that the model itself is not up to scratch, especially with some of the newer things that OpenAI has been able to do around mathematics. But in many ways, it is rather good. And one of the advantages that they have done, one of the things that they've interestingly done here, is that they have given us a ability to see the reasoning behind the system. If you use DeepSeek and you basically ask it to show the reasoning, if you ask it, for instance, to tell you what the best movies of last year were, it'll, for instance, say, I don't know what the current year is. My last string data is 2023, so last year is 2022. How do you define the best movie? Was it the one that won the Oscar? Was it the one that basically made the most money? List both to give the person a choice. That's the kind of response you get from asking it a question. And then you'll get the actual response. Okay? So it shows the reasoning. And I think that's one of the things that really has impressed the public, because the reasoning kind of gives it more of a humane feeling to it. It makes you understand why it's saying what it's saying a bit more clearly. And it comes across for those that have used it as being a bit more intelligent almost than just getting the straightforward answer from a company like OpenAI. Now, why was this so disruptive for the market? Well, if China can get a $6 million machine created, or system created, why are you worrying about the $500 billion that OpenAI is trying to get to do its next step in AI? 500 billion, that's 5,000 million. Literally 100,000 times more than what DeepSeek basically used to create its system. That is, like I said, equivalent to the current system. Maybe because there's a cheaper way to make these systems. And if that's the case, well, one of the things that you're going to spend a lot less money on is chips. Because if you don't need the chips to like build a $500 billion machine, well, NVIDIA is going to suffer. And I think that is one of the things that we've seen here in regards to the movement this week. NVIDIA, ASML, the company that makes the machines that make the chips, both suffered massive losses in the week. Now, I think this is a bit short-term in terms of outlook. Firstly, yes, DeepSeek, brilliant, invention, brilliant advance, built on stuff already being done by OpenAI. How do I know this? Because at some point in time, the machine, because the DeepSeek system thinks it's OpenAI's ChatGPT. Sometimes it refers to itself as ChatGPT. You don't get that just by accident. You get that when you use ChatGPT's stuff to build DeepSeek. So it's like basically modifying an already built engine and making it much more efficient. So that's one thing. So if you're going to get the next versions coming out, in all likelihood, they're not going to have the ability to train on that small amount of money like DeepSeek did, because you still need to do the fundamental core work, which is going to cost a lot of money. The second thing is that this is obviously very, very impressive, but why is it so impressive? It's because the Chinese have to focus on efficiency because they can't get access to the better chips. And this year, the chip, advancements are going to continue apace. And the way the sanctions against China work is that it's on power, not on individual chips. So let's just say there's 1,000 horsepower, in inverted commas, worth of chips out there that you're allowed to import to China. This year, one chip does, say, 20 horsepower. Next year, it does 100 horsepower. Effectively, that cuts the amount of top-end chips China can import down by a factor of 5, because each chip is more powerful. Therefore, you can only take in fewer chips in order to basically meet the thresholds. And I think China basically, unless it gets a huge advance in its own local chip manufacturing, is facing the last couple of years where they can be competitive with what's been done in the US and elsewhere towards the rest of the world. Because in a couple of years' time, the chips being available to, or becoming available to the US, trainers are going to be 100, maybe even more times more powerful than whatever the Chinese have available. And so even the Chinese are 100 times more efficient, they can barely keep up. And every year, this problem is going to get worse and worse and worse. So that's the important to look at. And the next thing is that Alibaba came out as well, a couple of days later after DeepSeek with its own model. And look, these models, when we first started the AI portfolio, one thing I said to you, the only thing that's really a danger to this portfolio has been the fact that, or will be the danger that there's a possibility that we might not get the advancements at the rate that we wanted to see from AI. They might be slower than expected. The hype might be, take more longer to be achieved. What the DeepSeek what's the release over the last couple of weeks have shown, and what Alibaba's new program as well has shown, is that not only are we keeping up forecast, advancement, but the advancement is progressing at a faster rate than had been thought. Last year, nobody would have thought that we could have a system as powerful as DeepSeek being trained as cheaply as it was trained for, even with the advantages it had from copying from OpenAI. This is a technological improvement that we weren't even foreseeing last year. And I think that is a very good sign for AI going forward. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to speaking to you guys again next week. Cheers.